Joining us now, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Welcome to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks, Shannon. Good to be with you.
Okay, so a lot to cover here. Let's talk about this. European leaders putting together what's being called an emergency summit in Paris tomorrow. They've been rattled by some of what they heard from members of the administration in Munich. They reportedly are not going to have a seat at the table for these opening talks with Russia about winding down that war. That's according to Special Envoy Keith Kellogg, former general. You said last week, though, Europe has to own this conflict moving forward. So why shouldn't the Europeans have a seat at the table at these conversations?
Shannon, let me tell you what we heard this week. We heard President Trump engage President Putin of Russia, immediately engage President Zelensky. And here's what both leaders had in common. Both of them said in those back-to-back calls that only President Trump could get them to the table. Only President Trump could drive peace. And, you know, this notion that our European allies haven't been engaged. President Trump also spoke with Macron this week. We have a visit with Prime Minister Starmer of the United Kingdom coming up. And we had no less than our Vice President, our Secretary of State, our Secretary of Defense, our Secretary of Treasury, who was in Kyiv personally, and our Special Envoy Kellogg, all in Europe this week, all engaging our allies. Now, they may not like some of the sequencing that is going on in these negotiations, but I have to push back on any notion that they aren't being consulted. They absolutely are. And you know, at the end of the day, though, this is going to be under President Trump's leadership that we get this war to an end.
Okay, so there are talks about talks starting this week. You are reportedly part of that team that's going to be in Saudi Arabia talking with the Russians, but there are questions about Ukraine's role. Here's what Senator Adam Schiff says. The president's inability to even identify Ukraine as an equal bargaining power after all the blood Ukraine has shed, it's just a shocking surrender of American values and interests. Now, President Zelensky says he's not going to be bound by any deal that's negotiated between Russia and the U.S. Are the Ukrainians going to have a seat at the table for those talks this week?
Well, what Secretary Besson, our Secretary of Treasury, was talking to Zelensky about, and then follow on with talks with Secretary Rubio and the Vice President, was entering into a partnership with the United States. We're talking about growing the pie for the Ukrainian economy, and I can't think of any better security guarantee than being co-invested with President Trump, with the American people going forward. And having those investments as a protection in of itself, number one. But number two, the American people deserve to be recouped, deserve to have some type of payback for the billions that they have invested in this war. And then further, Shannon, you know, I can't think of anything that would make the American people more comfortable with future investments than if we were able to be in a partnership and have the American people made whole. And I'll point out, much of the European aid is actually in the form of a loan that is repaid. It's repaid with interest on Russian assets. So, you know, President Trump is rethinking the entire dynamic here. That has some people uncomfortable, but I think Zelensky would be very wise to enter into this agreement with the United States. There's no better way to secure them going forward. And further, there was a question of whether Putin would come to the table. He has now done so under President Trump's leadership, and we're going to continue those talks in the coming weeks at President Trump's direction.
Okay, but given the cost that the Ukrainian people have paid, why would they not have a direct seat at the table, especially if Zelensky says whatever you come up with, he's not going to feel bound by unless they're actively, directly part of these talks?
Well, look, the Ukrainian people have fought valiantly. They have seen entire cities destroyed. The United States and Europe has supported this effort, but the United States unquestionably has borne the brunt of that support over the years. But now President Trump is clear it needs to come to an end. And there are key tenets that will drive these negotiations. Number one, it has to be a permanent end to the war. not a temporary end to the war. Number two, this can't be ended on the battlefield. This has turned into a World War I style meat grinder of human beings. Number three, I talked about how the structure of our aid has to change. And then number four, we're talking about economic integration going forward as the best arbiter of peace. All of those things are key underpinnings. And in terms of long-term military security guarantees, those have to be European-led. And I have to tell you, Shannon, when a third of NATO members still are not contributing, a third are still not contributing the minimum they all committed to a decade ago, I think that leaves a lot of Americans questioning the level of their commitment to back the rhetoric that we're seeing.
Okay, I want to try to get to a couple of other hot spots. Before we leave this, though, can you confirm those talks are beginning this week in Saudi Arabia between the U.S. and Russia?
President Trump initiated those talks personally with President Putin, and we'll carry those talks going forward in the coming weeks. And he is ready to move quickly to end this conflict. And we will bring everyone together as appropriate. Absolutely.
Okay, so I want to get to Israel. Iran, obviously, the continued instigator in a lot of what comes to the shores of the people of Israel. President Trump told Bret Baier a couple of days ago, a few days back, he says he'd love to make a deal without bombing them. But that stands in contrast to this report coming from the Washington Post. Says Israel is likely to bomb Iranian nuclear facilities in the next few months. It goes on to say that part of this is based on U.S. intel. It says the military intelligence report in the Washington Post spelled out two potential strike options, each involving the U.S. providing support in the form of aerial refueling, as well as intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, said those familiar with the document. So there are disagreements with about how much a strike could do to actually set this program back, whether it's weeks, months, years. But it would certainly increase tensions in that region. What would the U.S. involvement be in a strike? Can you speak to that report out of the Washington Post?
Shannon, I could speak to what the president has repeatedly said, and that is Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. That not only would be existential for Israel, I think it would be existential for the entire world because it could kick off a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. How we get there, I'm not going to get into the details of here, but the president has also expressed a willingness to take whatever action is necessary. All options are on the table, but also to talk to Iran as well if they want to give up their entire program and not play games as we've seen Iran do in the past in prior negotiations. So all options are on the table, but I'll promise you this. President Trump is absolutely serious, deadly serious, when he says Iran can never have a nuke, and certainly not on President Trump's watch. They are an irrational actor that we cannot allow to have their finger on the button.
Well, I'd like to get to China and so many other things that are on your plate at this moment. So please come back soon. Mike Waltz, great to have you.
All right. Thank you.